84% of us feel like learning adds purpose to our work, but demanding deadlines and overflowing inboxes often stop us from finding time to focus on our development. But what's good for us is also good for business. The stats show that organisations that invest in learning and development are more likely to experience growth. So with workplace learning back on the agenda for many firms, today, in a very special episode recorded at Deloitte University EMEA in Paris, we answer the big question: what do we need to learn about learning at work?
If we want to be successful and have a career of 45 years, we have only one choice. There's an ongoing skilling, upskilling and reskilling.
Organizations should have the duty to make people better during their work life in the organization. So they should become better in learning with new skills.
The worst thing is if you don't invest in people and they stay. Because then you have basically a workforce with outdated skills.
Organizations really have to think, how can I organize the different learnings for the right purpose, for the right speed, agility and so on.
Hello and welcome to the Green Room by Deloitte. I'm Steph Dobbs and I'm joined by the lovely Annie Wong. How are you doing, Annie?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. And today we're going to be talking about learning. Learning is of course good for us, particularly when it comes to our career. But it's easy for our own development to get pushed to the bottom of our to-do list. So, how do we make more time to learn at work? And what can businesses that we work for do to help? Today, we're going to be answering the big question: what do we need to learn about learning at work? Annie, who are we joined by today?
Today we are joined by Dr. Nick Van Dam, Chief of the IE University Centre for Corporate Learning Innovation and faculty for many international business schools, including Harvard in the US and Nyenrode in the Netherlands. We're also joined by Heike Dekker, Dean at Deloitte University. Thank you so much both for joining us.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you.
Yeah.
So we're going to use the word learning a lot today. And while it's not an unfamiliar word, what does it mean to you in the context of learning within organisations? Heike, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, do you have a day? Look, the first truth of life is that it's changing every day. So, and learning helps us to cope with the changes that are coming expectedly, unexpectedly. So that is it for me in general. And, you know, when people have done their studies and come to work, then you see very often then they think learning ends, but that is when it's just started. So I tell always my kids, like, no matter what you study, you have an entrance to the world of work, but what you do then, you never know. You can end up in something else because you learn all the day.
Yeah, learning for me as an individual is about becoming the best version of ourselves in life. And if we reflect on that, using the metaphor, we're all born as caterpillars, but in potential, where we can become butterflies. And to become butterfly is a transformation that we go through in life. And in order to do so, we have to learn, we have to reflect, and we have to develop new skills.
And Nick, what are some of the different types of learning? Because I think in an organisational context, you might think about things like online courses or learning on the job, but it's so much more than that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I always look at it from a formal learning and an informal learning perspective. The formal learning in organizations is learning that is planned, it's organized. So it can be an in-person event, like here at Deloitte University. But also it can be an online program that people take. So formal learning, there's a time that people will attend it, there's structure. And the informal learning is the learning what happens mostly on the job, if we do our work. So learning in the workflow. We connect with people, we work on different projects, different assignments, and as part of that we are learning. That's the informal learning. And what's very important to reflect upon in conversations with many organizations is that the formal learning really supports also the informal learning. So you cannot do the one without the other.
So let's maybe start thinking about why it is that we want to learn. So what actually drives us to do it? So a recent study by LinkedIn found that 84% of us like learning that adds actually purpose to our work. So is the greater purpose around it that sort of motivates us to learn, or is it something else? And maybe what are the benefits we can see on a personal level if we actually make the time to develop ourselves? Heike, should we come to you first?
There are moments where the urge to learn is high. So naturally, everybody wants to learn at that moment. So for example, when you start a new job or you're in a role, or when you have a problem to solve and you have not the answer, or you want to make a career step. So these are typical moments of need. Where it becomes a little bit more difficult is when these moments are not there. So you just take it as a professional that you work every day and you have the discipline to read an article or really reflect after a conversation with someone. Or I come from the commercial business of Deloitte, so for me, writing proposals, I hate it and I love it, because every time when I have submitted the proposal, I learned a lot. So if you put it from this angle, that needs also that you want to learn and the willingness to learn. So that is a bit the difference when it comes. And that makes it really difficult for organizations, for example, when they want to develop new skills like AI, Gen AI. How can you create the urgency that people learn? But very often you want to be early in time and their urge is not yet there. And how can you engage the learners to do that? So here comes the tension when it comes to learning and making time for it, or getting time for it. Yeah? So when you have competing priorities, when your boss says, no, other things have priority, you don't go to here because business is waiting. So that can be also a reason.
Nick, what about you? In your experience, what have you found really drives people to want to learn?
I think one thing goes back to if we look at our careers. In many countries around the world, retirement has been pushed out. At one point, in some countries, retirement was at 50, 55.
Delightful.
Today,
If only it
hard
would
to
be.
imagine, right? So today, in many countries, it's 67 and counting. And if we reflect on that, so if, let's say, if you join the workforce at 22, you have a 45 plus year career ahead of you. And if we look at all the changes that are happening, and if we look back 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, incredible. If we look ahead, the pace of change is accelerating. So one driver for learning and development at an individual level is that if we want to be successful and have a career of 45 years and being sustainable when it comes to our own performance, our well-being, we have only one choice. There's an ongoing skilling, upskilling and reskilling. And more people are realizing it. If you are 40, 45, you are in your mid of your career. You have the biggest part ahead of you, actually.
I find that really interesting because in a place like this, Deloitte University, it could be that, say, 20 or 30 years ago, it might not have existed because there's been a huge kind of shift or change in wanting to have that continuous learning throughout your life. Heike, have you seen that shift over time as well? Have you seen any differences over your career about how people or organizations have approached learning?
Yeah, absolutely. When I started like 35 years ago with my work, these kind of courses or offers have been really exclusive to top talent in the company. What had really changed due to technology advancement, but also the speed of change, that learning had democratized a lot, And what I mean, like LinkedIn Learning, or you have all what we call the MOOCs, the massive open online courses from Harvard, from really great universities that give access to everyone, no matter where you live, no matter where you come from, they're achievable. So I think that is really the big change in learning. It moved from exclusivity to democracy, abundancy. And nowadays the abundancy is so much that it's really difficult for learners to find their path through all this offer. So we have another challenge now. There's enough learning, but how can people find the right learning that fits their needs, that fits their purpose, is on the right time for the right thing? So that's the challenge right now. Do you agree, or do you see other developments?
Yeah, I think agree, Heike. I think if we look at the competitive landscape of organizations today, organizations need to work more effective, more efficient, smarter, better, etc. So there's ongoing competitive pressure. And that means actually that in order to be successful, in order to innovate at the pace of change, you need to make sure that your people have the skills to execute a business strategy. So it has become a key business driver for success. It also goes back to the talent definition, as Heike referred to. In the past, we looked at the high performers, a limited number of people. We say, we need to groom the next generation of top leaders. But today, many organizations, including Deloitte, when organizations look at people, they say, everybody is talented. So basically a very inclusive definition of talent. And that means that every single person needs to be developed in our organization to be successful. And then it also has an impact on how you organize learning for people, the importance. There's a huge body of science in terms of how we design the most effective learning. What is the best digital learning? So evidence-driven. And that's why today, like Heike and many others, people are heads of L&D, chief learning officers, deans, are people who really understand the business and they understand the discipline L&D.
Yeah, so important to know both really, isn't it?
It has also another angle why organizations have somehow the duty to offer learning to their people. And it is twofold. So what you saw that governments and so on, sometimes they bring in a gap. For example, the gap of higher education towards the work life. So nowadays, employers, they want to have experienced people already with 2 to 3 years experience. When you come from university, you don't have that experience. So how do you fill the gap? So organizations have also to step in this gap. There are many more examples, also elderly people. When there is a transformation and there's a massive redundancy, you release people to the labor market and they're not skilled. So even now we see all the organizations who skill first their employees to release them with new skills to the labor market. You see the duty to take care of your people with the right skills is moving very often from government, public sector, to organizations. So that we call the social organization that comes. The second here is that there's also duty of human sustainability. So we talk a lot about the environmental sustainability. In the Human Capital Trend Report from last year, we talked about the human sustainability. So organizations should have the duty to make people better during their work life in the organization. So when they come in, they should stay healthy or even become healthier. They should become better in learning with new skills. Even sometimes the financial area needs to be addressed to make them financially sustainable to live their life, which is super important for younger people nowadays. So you see also a little bit more pressure on the society, on organizations to also help people develop, not only because of performance and success, but also because of this duty.
Yeah. Maybe if I may build on that, what comes to my mind, an example, Heike. Many organizations are reflecting on their own role in society. What's the purpose of your organization? And we have seen a shift from focusing on the shareholder to basically serving a number of stakeholders in society. So as an example, one insurance company that I've been collaborating with, they have developed a people vision. And what they do, they explain to people who are interested in joining their organization that if you join us, we will help you to develop yourself, to be ready for your role, to accelerate you for your next role. And your next role can be within our organization or outside of our organization. Because we also don't know what will happen over the next 5 to 10 years, but we will do everything what we can to help you and to work with you to be ready for anything that's coming. Now, if you think about it for a second, people who are saying, well, Heike or Nick, if we train people, we invest in people, they might leave. I always say, well, yeah, some of them might leave. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But the worst thing is if you don't invest in people and they stay. Because then you have basically a workforce with outdated skills. And as an organization, Yeah, back to the business context here, you cannot execute your business strategy if you don't have the right talent, the people with the right skills to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe let's talk then about what barriers there might be within an organisation. So I suppose if we think about what those barriers might be, is it a case of just simply finding space and time in our diaries to sort of invest in learning, or are there other things that come into the equation? Let's maybe start with you, Heike.
Yeah, then we come a little bit to the learning culture topic and what is learning culture. Deloitte, together with Josh Bersin, did it's old research. It's already 12 years old about learning culture, but it's still valid that first of all, the people have to know how to learn. So that really comes to an individual, no matter what organization you are. So that's the ability to learn, but also the willingness to learn. So it starts from us. And then if you look at the environment, then of course leadership and manager, they play a really, really pivotal role. So from the 46 research items that we had, only 20 were relating to HR and the infrastructure that you do, but all the others to leadership and management. And it's not only time or that people can come here 2 days, it's also a continuous attention to the people. So do you see when somebody tries something, does an exercise, and maybe it's very risky and it's not a good experiment and it doesn't turn out well? That's the moment when a leader comes in and says, hey, at least you tried, that's a good feedback, and look further, how would you do it the next time? And here comes it to the attention, and this we very often lack because we have a dog, we have a full agenda and so on. So for me, it's in the big giving time, but it's also really seeing development attempts and also changes, and also recognize it. Doesn't have to be rewarded all the time, but see the recognition for people. So I think comes that. Another barrier, it's always called budget. But here I learned in the financial crisis, 2008, I worked at a bank and I just started a new job as a head of an academy and had to build it from scratch. And really the one day I had 40 million budget to spend, and literally next week I had only 2 million. And with this 2 million, I had to fulfill all the financial regulations that are necessary for bank employees. So there was almost nothing left for money to look really on more advanced skills or leadership and so on. So what I learned in that time is really use the power of people in the organization. So the leader-led principle that we had here, we turned there, and really with very limited budget, I think we had the best learning culture ever. All the budget has been centralized to me. That was one of the reasons I say, okay, if you want me to be the head there, every leader has to centralize it for me. For 1 year, it's fine, and let me show what we can do for learning. And I think we built the most impactful learning interventions that I ever had because of scarcity, not because of abundance of budget. So budget can be a trigger, but it doesn't have to.
Learning culture, and it's also sometimes called learning climate, is a topic that's on the mind of every single organization today. That's why companies are saying we need to have a culture where people are motivated, are engaged and committed to learn and grow. And it also goes back to what you mentioned before about purpose. We know that people who have for themselves, if they understand what their purpose is, why they are working in a certain companies, they are way more committed to learn and grow.
And do you think, I guess, in terms of actually coming around to the learning, is it better that we learn practically, sort of in the job, or do you think it's better we take time away from what we do?
It depends what kind of learning it's needed in that time. So, of course, you can doubt here, people come here, it's offline. So we had some years, Nick, I think in Learning Country, where we said, this is the classical learning is out. Yeah. Why do you do that? It's inefficient. You have the learning transfer. People come home, what they really apply from the 2 days learning, maybe only 10 minutes of a great quote or a talk with somebody. Somehow this is changing again. Knowledge learning, really knowledgeable skills, you can do fantastically online. There are fantastic applications. That's also offline work, and then you apply it in the work and you repeat an exercise and you fail and you learn. So that is absolutely there. Leadership learning, as we do it here, has different purposes. So first is we have the milestones. So when you are new in a new level, we offer a milestone because each new level at Deloitte requires a different mindset and you had to new skills. So they have a comprehensive offer, and it is And if you advance in your career, you have to work more internationally, globally. So we work much more together at clients. So it's really fantastic to build your network. You can also have a party to network, you can look why learning is then the thing. But what we see is that the human connection, coming together, creating serendipity, getting spark, get inspired from each other, this distinct human element becomes more and more important. So therefore, I think the offline learning, classical learning coming together will be always limited. You have to think when you do it, where it makes sense. But it's really, really important.
Because it is interesting, isn't it? You sort of alluded to it there, but we live in a world where there's a lot of digital learning, isn't there? And particularly, after COVID, we all learnt to do our jobs in that way. Same, connecting with colleagues internationally, we learnt, doing that almost fully online. So it is interesting that Deloitte's chosen to invest in in-person learning, right?
Yesterday, it's a little anecdote. I had the mayor here from the environment, and she was looking around. Do these people know each other? I said, no, they've never seen them before. But
now they
have fun together. I said, yes, somebody was guitar playing and some people
Annie
were
was
singing.
on the piano.
Oh, you've been the piano.
We didn't capture that for the podcast.
Yep. And this is the serendipity, and that is the moment where they connect and create, and people like people, we are herd animals. So it's important for our well-being to be amongst others. And this is really different now here in Paris, and also after COVID. People go back super energized and happy. And then I think, and it's also about the learning experience.
If we bring people together from an organization, like we do here at Deloitte University, it's basically connecting with each other, with more senior leaders, learning from each other. It's about coaching and mentoring. It's about, as Heike mentioned, the networking element. But it's also a sense of belonging. You feel like I'm part of this organization. This organization cares for me. They invest in me. And what's interesting when it comes to reasons why people are leaving, for the first time in 50, 60 years, it has not been the boss anymore, but a lack of professional development and career opportunities in organizations. That's why people are leaving. And if you look at generations, particularly Gen Z, that's on their mind. The people who are now in the workforce, born after 1995, for them is ongoing development a very key thing. And if they believe they get stuck in a role in year 1 or year 2, they understand what's changing in society, in companies. They understand that if I don't take care of my own development, guess what? I might be in trouble down the road. And therefore they are quitting companies. So that's also another business reason for organizations to invest in learning and development. Not only online, that's very important, but also in person. And I call it high-tech, high-touch. We need to have a high-tech culture where people learn in the workflow online, have access to knowledge, expertise at their fingertips. And at the same time, it's about the high touch, being together, connecting with other people as humans, as what Heike mentioned.
Cook for Good is one of the social enterprises that Deloitte supports through our 5 Million Futures programme. Cook for Good tackles food insecurity, socialisation and barriers to work on a social housing estate in King's Cross in London. They run team building and cooking experiences with corporate teams making meals to share with local residents and outreach organisations. All profits are then used to fund a community programme which includes free cooking classes, employment programmes and a surplus food pantry. To find out more or to book your own team cooking experience, head to cookforgood.uk.
It's really interesting. I've been reflecting on what you've both been saying and the emphasis on in-person connection and in-person learning opportunities. How do you then make sure that those in-person opportunities are accessible and inclusive? Have you seen some really good examples, perhaps here at Deloitte University or elsewhere, where organisations have really gone out of their way to make sure those learning opportunities are accessible for all?
In principle, yes. For example, one of my clients, when I've been in business, it was an organization who was rapidly growing in the whole energy transition, really from 2,000 employees to 10,000 in 3 years, and even need to double more. And they had a very poor learning approach and landscape. And what they did, for example, they outsourced all to a broker, learning broker unit, and they just pay one fee a year, and people have access to all learning there, no matter what it is, but also to stimulate the learning habit and attitude. So people even could go to a cooking class or whatsoever. That was just to stimulate, again, the learning mindset, because the biggest part of their employees have been above 50, but also give access to all. And that was in person, online, whatever they want, coaching, personal coaching, mentoring, whatsoever. So I thought, yeah, that is really a changing mindset that you allow whoever is there in the organization, no matter what level, operational, strategic, everybody has access to learning.
Definitely. And I suppose we've now talked about barriers, so we maybe look at solutions and the way in which we can all make sure that we learn during our working day. So let's maybe start with businesses. How can they create programs which ultimately are embedded? We talked a lot about the fact, that culture needs to be embedded within organisations. How can they make sure it's embedded within their strategies? So Nick, you've worked with a lot of different organisations in lots of different sectors. Can you maybe share some more examples of how businesses have actually done that successfully?
Yeah, so let me give an example related to AI. And it is also, let's say, the big picture globally. As I mentioned, if we look at many countries in Europe, but also outside of Europe, it's expected that the economic growth is very limited the next decade. That's one. Secondly, if you look at the investments that governments have to make, it goes up significant on all levels actually. The only way we can do that is to become more productive. And to become more productive, it's about how can we use new technologies. That plays a big role. And how we redesign the work that we are doing in organizations. So that means actually that, as an example, there are organizations who say, we want to become more innovative and we need to increase our productivity. So, as an example, I know organizations who say, we have a massive upskilling program for every single employee to use Gen AI, showing a number of use cases that are specific to the role that I have. How can I use Gen AI to do that and become more productive? One example. Another example is overall digital transformation. Every organization is going through a digital transformation. They will automate more, digitize more, etc. That requires people to develop new skills. Many people move into different roles. And by default, that means that they need to learn new skills to do the role or the new task in their existing role. Also a big link to business strategy. The third one, when it comes to change, there are many leadership programs where basically leaders need to understand how to lead change successfully. And what we know from all the research, also from the human capital studies from Deloitte, is that still a lot of change initiatives do not live up to their promises. And the main reason is that we are not necessarily taking in mind the impact of change on people. So if we understand that better, as a leader, we are more successful. And related to that, when we think about leadership, I always say that every leader who gets appointed is not appointed to maintain the status quo. Every leader who is appointed at any level in the organization needs to take what she or he is doing to the next level. That means by default change, innovation. And a lot of organizations, this now leadership development has become, in all reports that we are seeing, the top priority of organizations.
And you hear at the same time, it's really overwhelming for leaders to handle all these different imperatives that they have to do, fulfills. And therefore you also have to develop other kind of leadership programs, speed of change fast, technology advancement, the future of our earth, the geopolitical elements. So how do you cope with that?
And that's kind of the power of bringing people together in an in-person program like we do here at Deloitte University. It's a moment for leaders to reflect, because leaders around the world, they say, we have hardly time to reflect. We are busy from 8 to late. We go from one teams to another teams to another teams to email. We have no time to reflect. And that's the power of bringing people together. It's a moment for reflection. It's a moment to go deep in yourself and to understand your behaviors and what are successful behaviors moving forward. And that's kind of is so powerful if we bring people together to help them to change their mindsets and as a consequence of that, their behaviors.
But that's on behavioral learning, and technical learning is still also remain really important. You would never bring people here together to learn technical skills. You do that more close to the business where you are in, close to the everyday work tasks you are in. And here organization really have to think, how can I organize the different learnings for the right purpose, for the right speed, agility, and so on.
I find that really interesting, that the different kinds of learning, so technical, behavioural, soft skills, whatever it might be, is kind of more or less successful in different settings or environments. When you're thinking about how you measure the success of a particular learning or development intervention, what other ways or initiatives for measuring successful learning have you found to be really successful?
Yeah, that is
It's hard, right? It's really hard.
So yeah, look, and this is a little bit, what do you want to measure? In fact, what you would love to measure is the performance, if that had increased or the productivity has increased. And that is quite difficult because, as you mentioned in the beginning, learning takes place in so many moments of a day, in a week, in a month, in so different ways. So what of this one intervention had what effect on the whole productivity? So this is super difficult. I think I'm busy with that since 25 years. And honestly, I tried to calculate ROIs, and the measurement and getting data was more expensive than the learning intervention itself. And maybe I'm a little bit black and white when I say that it's good to measure and to make these pulse surveys and get a glimpse. But what I found out, those leaders who intrinsically think that learning is a necessity, it's a strategic enabler, they don't never ask me for an ROI or show me why it's successful. They just have the fundamental belief it is important and it will be effective.
Particularly among a lot of learning and development professionals, they feel like I need to prove what I do is the right thing. And that, of course, from a mindset, that's correct. When it comes to measurements, I completely agree with Heike. The pure financial ROI calculation doesn't work. Why not? There are too many variables. If I go to any CFO with an ROI calculation and say, someone attended this program, there's a 375% ROI. She or he will pick it apart in seconds because there are too many variables in the calculation. Now, saying that, of course, we want to make sure that we have impact, what we do. And you can measure impact. There are things, when it comes to, as an example, people who are going to programs, they are more engaged, they are more motivated, they are more committed. It's less likely that they will leave the organization. It's more likely that they are going back after being at DU, they are excited, engaged, they work hard next week for clients and also in other organizations. And of course, we also like to understand, are people changing their behaviors? And through performance management processes, we can get insights on that. Based on 360s, we get insights on that. So yes, we see a shift in behaviors. But also from a measurement perspective, of course, we like to understand more in the L&D space, if L&D professionals designing a program, is it the most effective design, the most efficient design? The most engaging design. So therefore, we like to get data on that so we can make our programs better. So yes, important to measure, look at impact, but ROI, stay away from that. There needs to be a belief, and in organizations where learning and development is kind of very strategic, you have leaders who say, do you know what? I believe in this. Similar to, let me give you another example. If you, as a parent, if you want to send your child to an elementary school, you will not look at 10 schools and say, I like to see an ROI report. Is there an ROI if I send my child to the elementary school? Of course not. You know that sending a child to school has impact. She or he, your child, will develop themselves. And we need to have the same mindset in organizations. This makes sense. We know that. There are data, there's evidence.
And I suppose as we start to wrap things up then, let's look to the future. I suppose if we think about maybe like trends that are coming through the pipeline when it comes to learning in organisations, is there anything either of you are particularly excited about moving forward? What's changing?
Before it was always the technology. For me, it's let's use what there is in a good way, bring learning really into the entire talent management cycle. When you recruit people, if you onboard them, if you develop them, you career advance them. And I think this is a little bit more cumbersome work to do so, but I think here will be really the biggest effects. If you can link it a little bit to a business productivity and look at more assessments, 360s, I think we can do a lot. And of course, you can enrich the learning landscape because, for example, Gen AI, I did some experiments with the Gen AI tooling to exercise your sales pitches or the challenging communications, and people could redo it, and I had an hour in a room and we helped them a little bit to set it up, and they could exercise, they get fantastic feedback. So this kind of technology, if we embed it well, but what I say also with care and help them to use it properly, I think that for me would be more the trend than adding all kind of fancy new stuff. I have seen it not working always. But maybe I'm here getting old a little bit.
When I reflect on what are trends that I'm hopeful they will play out, well, one relates to what you see happening is that L&D will become more strategic, or let me say it differently. For companies, has become really important to indeed look at capability development as a very strategic element of the business strategy. You cannot execute your business strategy if you don't have the right people with the right skills. So L&D becomes more strategic. I think that's fantastic. Maybe the last one is about learning in the workplace, on-the-job learning. How can we turn the workplace into a learning place? And that requires organizations to redesign work. So that means that people have more opportunities to do different kind of work. What is very, very important, because we learn if we do something that we have never done before.
Fascinating, honestly, thank you both so much. I feel like I've learned so much just from this conversation.
Inspired.
I also feel really motivated and energized to go and do some learning. So thank you both so much.
Come to us and work with us.
Gladly.
Next week, no chance we're going to be.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but one thing we really like to do as we wrap up is give our listeners some tangible advice. So, Nick, I'll come to you first. What's one thing we can all immediately do to re-engage with learning and development within our careers?
First, for ourselves to recognize that ongoing learning is incredibly important to be successful short-term and longer-term. And that means actually we need to reflect on when will we take time for learning, and also a lot of people are investing themselves, make investments themselves in learning and development. Embrace a growth mindset. You know, the challenge is that, let me say, on the positive side, we know from the neurosciences that as humans we can learn our entire life, until our late 80s actually, if we are still alive. We can do that, but it requires a mindset for that. Unfortunately, there are people at certain stages in life, they might tell themselves, well, I can't learn this anymore, etc. That's not true. So you need to be open to learn new things, revisit what you have done in the past, and if that's your mindset and you take time for learning, make the investment in your developments, you will flourish. You'll become the butterfly in life.
We always call that, we switch the culture of learning to the culture of curiosity. So that is what you say.
Yeah.
Also.
And Heike, what about advice for businesses that are maybe looking to reinvigorate or review their learning and development strategy? What advice would you have?
Oh, that's a big... you asked me short advice. I think also here, just embrace the mindset that learning and continuous development is the strategic enabler for your future. And do not see it always as a cost center, but really as a value center. That would make the big difference. Yeah.
Brilliant. Great advice. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so that brings us to an end. And let's finally wrap up the episode with an answer to the big question. So what do we need to learn about learning at work? So Nick, let's come to you first.
I think the key thing is that we need to, for ourselves, develop a mindset or advance our mindset as lifelong learners. And if we do that, it has a positive impact on ourselves, because we know from research studies on happiness that learning connects us with other people. It will help us to build relationships. If we gain more insights about ourselves in terms of who we are, what we do, how we can stay healthy, that will set us up for a life where we are flourishing.
Love it. Annika?
Yeah, and I took the angle like there's no quick fix, there's no golden nugget. You have to really approach this as an expertise and a discipline you have to take care of.
Love it. Well,
Great.
both, thank you so much for joining Annie and I today. We're both feeling very inspired, I'm sure.
Yes, it was enjoyable to work with you.
It definitely has
I really
been.
enjoyed it.
And thank you very much for listening to this episode of The Green Room.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. We release a new episode every other Tuesday with another big question. So don't forget to hit follow or subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening or watching. That way, you'll be alerted whenever a new episode drops. This podcast is produced by our very own Pod Squad. Original music by Ali Barrett.